DeepSeek has kind of blown the industry away, and everyone has a million and one questions. And do you see this as a hallmark moment for the AI sector as a whole? And what your kind of thoughts on it?
We had DeepSeek hosted on our network within like an hour of it dropping. So I think the beauty of these models being open source is you can run them anywhere at any time. And I think it's just a very positive step that AI is moving in that direction. But I think
What do you think the second and third order effects of this will be?
I think so far everyone kind of built AI products with the assumption that intelligence is metered. I think of it like AI is one of the few softwares that has marginal cost. And
So thanks for jumping on. And I've been looking forward to this because I've been scratching my head trying to dig into what the hell's actually happening in the kind of crypto and AI space. And it's taken up the vast majority of my mind share at the minute. And I've kind of told the team double, triple, quadruple down on the sector going forward. So, um, but I want to kick it off with the question on everyone's lips, like, we're coming off the back of this on 5th of February. DeepSeek has kind of blown the industry away. It's like, and everyone has a million and one questions. And I just want to kind of pick your brain on how you kind of see this. Do you see this as a hallmark moment for the AI sector as a whole? And what your kind of thoughts on it? And if you've had a chance to kind of play around with it and things like that.
yeah, I mean, firstly, like at Mira ourselves, like we had DeepSeek hosted on our network within like an hour of it dropping. So I
Yeah.
think the beauty of these models being open source is you can run them anywhere at any time on any device, whether it's hosted or your own. And I think it's just a very positive step that AI is moving in that direction. But I think it's very interesting, taking my ex investor hat on a little bit. The market structure of AI has like really changed, right? Because everyone assumed that the demand for like compute and infrastructure would keep going up because everyone assumed that the demand would come from training. Now the thing about training is you front load all the demand, right? You buy all the GPUs up front, you train a really large model, and you pray to God that someone uses it. Now, what's happened with reasoning is that that ideal is flipped on its head because now what people are saying is you don't need that much compute to train a model up front, but you spend all that compute instead on inference when people are
Mhm.
actually using. So now the new vector that's kind of come in the demand projection of any of these models is the fact that real usage matters, which was always like assumed to be an afterthought for any of these training models. So if you look at Nvidia's projections, they'd be like, we expect GPT-5 to be trained this year, GPT-6 to be trained next year, which is why my compute demand will keep going up. But now they're like, okay, maybe GPT-5 and GPT-6 might not cost that much compute to train. They might be like incremental versus like magnitude shift, but all that compute might shift to the users who are actually using GPT-5 and 6, like what we call like reasoning models.
Mhm.
But what that means is now your demand curve is suddenly flattened, right? Because you might still hit that demand requirement, but it's going to be like over quite a period of time. So I think that's what the market really reacted to. It's extremely bullish because this just means that, and everyone talked about the Jevons paradox that day, but like it's basically that the cheaper things become, more accessible things become, the demand just keeps inducing higher. So there are two kind of super bullish things I draw out of this. One of the reasons why I started Mira in the initial days was when Llama 2 had come out. And I feel that this is a similar moment to that because Llama 2 told the world basically that there will be open models that are as good as like GPT-4. And what DeepSeek says is it just confirms the fact, right, that there will be open model you can run locally that will be as good. And I think for the crypto AI sector in general, that's super bullish because the whole sector is built on open infrastructure, right? So if you have models that can actually compete, you actually have infrastructure that can compete. And infrastructure that can compete with the incentives we know that we can kind of create is like, I think, a winning formula.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been kind of amazing to see, and I, it's just been a kind of like breath of fresh air. Obviously, there's been a lot of pushback from an optics perspective around OpenAI and ChatGPT, and obviously the meme of closed AI because it's completely not open source, and it initially intended to be that from, I think, Elon Musk's original kind of vision for the thing. But yeah, I'm obviously open source maxi. I love how quick innovation can move when things are open and people can kind of tinker with them. And yeah, I think the kind of paradigm shift that just really recently happened was kind of amazing. So it was great to kind of hear from your perspective how it's affecting you guys. And yeah, it's kind of as I expected to kind of hear it straight from the source. Yeah. So what do you think the second and kind of third order effects of this will be obviously for the AI sector, maybe from an investment perspective, but then also how are you guys thinking about like the second and third order effects from a product perspective?
Yeah, I think so far, at least till maybe Q4 of 2024, everyone kind of built AI products with the assumption that intelligence is metered, right? Because how you charge for AI today is you charge on the usage of the API, and each API call has a particular cost associated. So there's like I think of it like AI is one of the few softwares that has marginal cost, right? Otherwise, most software before AI did not have marginal cost, right? Server cost would be like negligible to scale from 10,000 users to a million
Hmm.
users. In AI, this cost of like running a more app with like 10,000 users linearly scales with the number of users that you kind of get. And that was the paradigm till something like DeepSeek came out. I think what DeepSeek showed and what I think models similar to DeepSeek will show in the future is the cost per unit of intelligence is just falling off a cliff.
Yeah.
So the kind of mental model that's changed for everyone in the industry is how do you build applications, businesses, whatever, assuming infinite intelligence, right? Because everyone would assume that okay, I have a budget of $10,000, I have to make sure all my AI needs are fit in that budget. But now suddenly you can get 100x your intelligence requirements in that $10,000 budget. So our kind of mental framing of how we should think about applications, businesses, products has completely kind of moved to a different direction. And that's also how, like, if you think about how models themselves are improving, they're also kind of running behind this tailwind, because most model improvements, I'd say, in the last 6 months or last 8 months have come from this idea of inference scaling. Inference scaling is basically a principle that says instead of just making larger and larger models to make the AI better, you need to figure out how to get the same size models to think more. And thinking more has like different ideas to it. There's reasoning, there's chain of thought, there's tree of thought, and like a bunch of different things. But basically, the premise is if you get these models to think more at the post training level, which means during inference, you can actually
Hmm.
get better and better outputs. And if you marry these two things together, which is one, your intelligence is getting cheaper and cheaper. And second is that, if you use more intelligence, you just get better models. You're coming to a point where you're saying that you're getting much better models at the same price, if not lower. And I think that's a trend that's here to stay. And like this was kind of an open secret that what OpenAI was using with their O1 and O3 models. But what DeepSeek did was basically just, open source that playbook. They said, this is how you do reasoning, this is what works. And now you have like 100 teams in the world just racing towards making these models better using that framework. So I think it's a net positive for the AI community. It's the net positive for the world. I do think that, the geopolitical kind of implications of this are also positive from a comparative perspective, because it
Hmm.
ensures that like some of these closed labs don't kind of become monopolies. And I think whoever is downstream of that just stands to benefit. So, middleware applications, it's going to be like a golden age for them in the next few years.
Yeah, and it wasn't just a like statistically significant um order of magnitude difference in the cost. I believe it was like 27x if I'm not mistaken, like 3 cents
Exactly.
per thousand tokens at ChatGPT, and whereas like a tenth of a cent or something for DeepSeek as well. So I just love the idea that teams that were probably never really gonna be able to drum up the funding to kind of get their idea or their vision or their dream off the ground, and now like probably all scrambling around being like, oh shit, we can actually make this a reality now, which is like I just love that. I think it's great.
Yeah. I think now another thing from a crypto AI perspective is the capital formation threshold is low enough that you can
Exactly.
bootstrap the requirement in crypto markets. You don't have to go and raise like venture funding from Silicon Valley. If you can build a great model in like 50 million, there's enough and more capital available in crypto for you to be able to do that.
100%. Um, so where are we at with the agent space, like internally in the crypto bubble and the intersection of crypto and AI and the wider world? Because I know OpenAI are about to, I think Operator is out, if I'm not mistaken, which looks fantastic. I can't get it because my VPN still won't let me get on, even if I'm trying. But yeah, like where's like high level, where are we at across all those kind of different verticals, and where do you kind of see us going in the near term?
Yeah, I think the agent space is somewhere where my team and I are like closest embedded with, simply because like that's where most of our technology gets used. But it's been an interesting evolution, right? I think 2023 was the year of models and just LLMs. Like people didn't know what agents were; they were kind of figuring out what LLMs were in the first place. 2024 was the year of people understanding what an agent is. Agents were still terrible; like you couldn't get them to do anything. Memory was constrained, all that, and they continue to be terrible, right? 2024 is the year where you will start seeing 2025, sorry, is the year that you will start seeing agents doing things of high consequence, right? Which means that they will be doing actions and steps that you would not have let them do last year. For example, giving them money or making them do something which is, I'd say, having a high tail risk, right? For example, if you're a customer support bot and you have like legal liability risk, right? You can actually start letting agents do that. But the kind of big bottleneck that still remains and continues to be like, the dragging kind of factor behind what's holding back these deployments is this idea of hallucinations.
Hmm.
It's the fact that these models just are too probabilistic in nature for them to like do everything right. And when these use cases move to high consequence, the big concern is always that, even if you're like wrong 95% of the time, but when something is high consequence, it's high tail risk, right? That means that even one wrong action, one wrong transaction, whatever you call it, can basically just, take away all the benefit you got from it in the first place. Like
Hmm.
how I think about it is, you can have a DeFi agent that does everything you want, can get you like 100% annualized return without you being involved. But it can also just randomly click on an exploited contract and lose all your money. And it's very hard to price that risk. So most people are not willing to kind of take that risk in the first place. So I think that continues to remain unsolved problem. Like, I read in the news recently that the next version of Alexa is supposed to be fully LLM powered using like Anthropic's LLMs and stuff. But a company like Amazon, a multi-trillion dollar company like Amazon, has still not been able to ship it because of like this
Oh
hallucination issue,
wow.
right? So if that is a constraint that a company like Amazon has, it's a constraint that most companies have. So right now, where I see agents is basically in two buckets. You have the entertainment agents. These are agents that like just exist for fun, right? Like, create a song or a Twitter bot that you can reply to, etc., etc. Or you have a co-pilot agent whose entire job is to maximize your human's productivity, but the accountability sits with the human, right? So for example, if I'm using like an agent to kind of research and create tweets for me, but I'm posting the tweets, and if there's something wrong in the tweet, I'm going to be held responsible, not the agent. So I think that's where most of the agents lie. Within crypto, I think most of it is still pure entertainment. I don't see any productivity agent really picking up. But like everything from like Eliza to Arc to Cerebro, all of this was just entertainment, right? But what it showed people, and what I think, being an investor in the past and now being a founder, what people want to see is magic in the bottle. And that really like unlocked that magic in the bottle moment for people, that they were like, holy shit, like these agents are real. If you can get them interacting on chain and transacting on chain, the world's going to look very different 3 or 5 years from now. And what that just did is it moved the slope of innovation up into the right, and we're seeing like hundreds of teams and billions of dollars now going in that direction. So 25, I think, is going to be the year where agents get more high consequence, they get more reliable. But I do believe that we're at least a year out from seeing like fully autonomous creatures coming on chain or even in the like online world.
Yeah, and so what would we benchmark that against? So like let's say you've got kind of a, I don't know, junior analyst at a quant firm or a fund or a prop shop or something like that. Um, how do we benchmark that from the percentage of mistakes that someone like in a junior role would typically make in a, I don't know, in a quarter, in a half a year, in a year, and where does, like, obviously you'd expect kind of like pretty simply to be able to expect that a senior analyst would make less mistakes. And then where do we benchmark the agents and the, I suppose, hallucinations that could cause like the mistakes of consequence that you're kind of like relying on, or do we? or do you guys have a framework to how to kind of like measure that internally?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, right? So I believe that the way you measure this is actually how the way you align incentives in the future is going to be how you price this. So instead of saying I'm hiring an intern and I'm going to benchmark the mistakes, I think the way you do it well is you say I'm only going to pay you for success,
Hmm.
right? So what that does is incentivizes the agent or like the creator of the agent to maximize the rate of success, which automatically means minimize any errors, etc. that you bring into it. I do think so our kind of baseline understanding of intelligence and capability does not translate directly to LLMs because like when we think of like capabilities, we say, okay, this is like a junior analyst level person, this is like maybe a principal level person, this is a fund manager, this is like CEO, for example, right? The issue with LLMs is, they exist on different parts of that spectrum for different things, right? Like an LLM might be at PhD level capabilities in doing research, but it might be at like high school level for math. And if you kind of marry those two skills together, you don't get the output you want. So I think the skill set over there is as an agent builder or whatever is one figuring out what subset of the agent or what LLM is good at what and kind of have them work together because it's very hard that you get a single LLM in the back end being able to do everything for you. And then I have a like I'm not a big fan of benchmarking in the AI space because I
Mm-hmm.
think benchmarking is
You think
often over.
do you think it gets gamified? That
It's completely
people.
gamified. I mean, like everyone trains models to meet benchmarks, right? Like SWE bench is the worst benchmark you can use because
Hmm.
any bot that does well on SWE bench will never do well on your code because it's just like very different from what it expects. So I think benchmarking needs to move to maybe more of like it has to move to like your use case, right? So what
Hmm.
people need to be able to figure out is that how can we create what we call golden data sets for our use case. So, for example, if it's software, maybe have 5 repos of your own code base that you benchmark against. And this is going to be a skill set that if someone gets right, it's going to be like it's going to define their success in AI versus their peer success. Because how well you can evaluate what your AI does is going to be the defining differentiator between you and your competitor because that defines the feedback that goes into the AI to continuously make it better. If that feedback is poor, the AI just keeps getting worse and worse. How we do it at Mira is honestly, we also work with this idea of golden data sets. So we often define based on like our customer or developer, and we often allow them to define what their golden data set is. So Graham, for example, for you, if you want an agent to start autonomously tweeting on your behalf, the
Hmm.
first thing we'll ask you to do is collect 10 samples of the best tweets you've seen, right, in that context. And then that becomes the benchmark against which you measure the agent, right? Because otherwise, I just tell it to be a great writer. Who is it a great writer in which context, right? Does it write tweets like a DJ crypto trader? Does it
Shakespeare.
write so there's a lot of like subjectivity involved. So people who can kind of navigate that, it's gonna like be a really big differentiator for them.
Yeah, and I mean, we've been playing around with 11 Labs quite a lot because you can imagine I've probably done over 600 or 700 podcasts at this point, so it's got a shit ton of data that we can pump into it, and still just not like it has like accents and like stresses on certain words when it doesn't need to and stuff like that. But we're gonna keep persevering with it just to kind of turn out like I don't know voiceovers for advertisements and daily news and kind of get it to read our articles and things like that. But yeah, it's been it's been an interesting journey, to say none the least. But it's exactly what you're saying. If I asked like the people in the blockmates community, do you think this sounds good? They'll probably say, yeah, it just sounds like you speaking. But like me being so close to it and understanding what I speak like and having to listen to these podcasts back when we go through the edit, I've heard my voice a billion times, which is quite uncomfortable. But I can hear the discrepancies in it as well. So it's I suppose it's who's benchmarking it to and to what end effect.
Exactly, right? And I think this is going to be this is going to be a continuous problem because even now if you think about it, every activity which is even broadly creative, whether it's speaking, even coding, right? People are code in
Mm.
different have different styles. You will have to understand what works well for you because if you don't understand that, you will never be able to train an AI model that works well for you.
And what about so obviously the world that I'm picturing let's say like at Blockmates, we've got someone who's acting as kind of like personal assistant. We've got someone who is, I don't know, a research assistant for like our day to day, because on the investing side, maybe we've got someone who's moving some of our like treasury around. Like, so you're starting to look like, what does this agentic workforce look like? Um, to pick your brain on it, what is that going to look like from a communication from agent to agent perspective? And is there any limitations there currently? What is that? I suppose I don't want to use the word composability. I don't know if that's a correct term to kind of use, but how does that landscape look like when there's like multiple different agents? Maybe they're built on different frameworks and the communication between each one, so you're actually getting a coherent workforce as well.
Yeah, I'm not really too concerned with it. I feel like the world so far has already been built, at least since like 2014, 2015. Most of like what we know of the internet has been designed using microservices, right? And microservices are inherently connector driven. So a lot of those connectors which are needed already exist. Like today, you can have agents like post on Twitter. You can have agents go through like your Microsoft or Google Sheets. You can have agents make phone calls and stuff. So I don't think that's much of a concern. I think what's going to become a concern in the future is really the auditability of it,
Hmm.
right? Like in that entire process of the work that the agent does, the thinking that it does, you as like the agent operator, like I'd say, if I have to use that word, how do you continuously kind of keep track of what's working and what's not working? If there are mistakes, how do you retrace? Because there are going to be like so many steps and so many things that the agent does. Like think of like, oh, I don't know if you've seen Deep Researcher by OpenAI, but
Yep.
researcher thinks for like 12 minutes. And a machine thinking for 12 minutes is like hundreds of thousands of words before it kind of figures out what it has to do. How are you going to be able to kind of form that audit trail of figuring out what was right, what was not wrong? Right. And I think this is a problem people are not understanding right now because of the kind of simplistic nature of what agents are today. But agents will grow orthogonally. They won't grow like linearly. Like you won't have an agent doing one task today, two tasks tomorrow. You'll go from one agent to five to 50 to 500
Hmm.
because you'll have constantly kind of specialize into smaller and smaller agents. And then I think observability and just monitoring all this stuff is going to get really hard.
Yeah, I want to circle back to the hallucinations aspect, and can you kind of give us some figures so we know what we're working with here? So let's say, not to pick on anyone, but let's say AI XPT from virtual. So that's, I'd argue it's relatively low consequence. Like, I suppose agent that is probably scraping a lot of different Twitter feeds and accounts and news sources and stuff like that, and then churning out quite good information about the space. But then there's obviously quite a few times when it spits out some less than desirable information that's either completely wrong, or it kind of goes rogue and starts shitting on virtuals. Or I think there was like something about World 55 the other day, like sometimes its math is slightly off. But high level, what are the kind of figures you typically be expecting on the back end that has to have human intervention there, and like, or lack thereof human intervention, hence why we're seeing the mistakes?
Yeah, I think broadly, if something like an AIXPT or the likes, you would expect something like a 10 to 15 to 20% like hallucination rate. And
Right.
hallucinations are not just like complete errors, right? It can be like a complete error. It can also just be an error of omission where you don't give like enough context. So, for example, what happened in the World Liberty Fire thing was like basically, if I'm not wrong, they burnt a bunch of WETH and extra like withdrew ETH onto some exchange, but AXPT just caught like the withdrawal of ETH and not the burn. So it was like, oh my god, these guys are transferring so much ETH, right? So these can be errors which are like completion errors, and then there's just complete mistakes, right? Where then when someone called AXPT out on it, the bot basically tweeted that yeah, World Liberty Fire needs to hallucinate less, when it's actually the bot that's hallucinating. So like it's just so elementary right now that it's great entertainment. Like it's like a KOL you can just follow on Twitter and consume content, but it's not like something you would want to act on, because if you acted on that, you'd be like in a pretty bad state. So yeah, I'd say those are like the rough numbers I would estimate. And then the way I'm coming to that number is, I've this is like a golden number I've seen across a lot of products and businesses, where consumer apps, like agents, even like co-pilots and stuff, the hallucination rate is somewhere between like 10 to 20%. And interestingly, hallucinations go up as the complexity of the task increases, right? So right now, AXPT is just collating some information and synthesizing it. But if you start asking it to act on that information, the hallucination will compound, because now it hallucinates on collection of information and hallucinates on acting on that information. So the end outcome is actually like a product of two probabilities, which is even lower than what you'd expect.
And do you get more convergence to the truth over time with that, or do you get quite a bit of drift?
You get more divergence because think of how these new models and new systems are emerging. They all think in steps, right? And if the probability of outcome at each step is sub one, that means it's like 0.9 or something. As you kind of multiply all those steps, the probability actually just keeps going down. So what we've seen is if you get like a bot that hallucinates 10% of the time and make it perform like 10 steps, uh, the hallucination kind of drops to like 40%, right? Which is like significantly higher.
Yeah.
And then what you have to do is like you have to spend a ton of more compute to constantly like retrace and refigure things out till you get to like a more reliable answer, which I don't think is like a very viable solution.
Yeah, it's like a big cruise liner being off on its direction by 1 degree, but it adds up and compounds like as
Exactly.
the community goes.
Exactly. And I think it's like a cruise liner being off by 1 degree that figures out it's off by 1 degree like 100 miles in instead of figuring it out like 1 mile in.
Great expansion on the analogy. um, so how do you guys come in and how do we get this down? Like, what's the process? Because that we can't obviously continue in that vein. And like, what's the kind of solution that you guys have came up with to kind of circumvent that?
Yeah, I think so. At Mira, we really came upon this problem, in late 23, and we really figured it out by just building a lot of cool shit ourselves. We were like, AI is cool. It's looks like it's the next big thing. Let's get our hands dirty and see what's working and what's broken. And we built a bunch of stuff. We tried to scale everything. Everything broke. I can tell you there's not a single app that could go from like 100,000 users to like a million users without like just having like edge cases galore, which could not let us scale.
Yeah,
And then we spoke to a lot of other people, and they were like, "Yeah, this is the same thing we face, right? Unless your application is very open-ended, which is like ChatGPT, and even like ChatGPT, right, which is like I'd say $100 billion company still puts the caveat that ChatGPT can make mistakes.
yeah.
So like it's not like they figured it out either. But we felt like if there is a way for us to constantly try to minimize this error rate or hallucination issue, we might be in a position that you know there's like a pretty valuable product that people can directly plug into. So our thesis was very simple. Our thesis was that hallucinations are a function of how a model is trained. Because what is hallucination? And if you think about it, it's basically giving models conflicting data and then having them to make decisions based on that conflicting data. A good example for this is if you feed a model information on like Trump and January 6th from like a right wing magazine and a left wing magazine, the output will always be something which is really random because it doesn't know kind of which viewpoint to take, right? And we realize that the way these models are trained are different in different companies or different model families, like we call it. Like the way Llama is trained is very different from the way GPT is trained, is very different
Mhm.
from the way Anthropic trains its models, is very different from the way like DeepSeek trains its models, for example. So our intuition, and this was something which like other people have worked on before, but our intuition was that if you can overlay these different models on top of each other, the probability that they all hallucinate on the same thing at the same time is statistically insignificant. And this is like the time immemorial wisdom of the crowds analogy, right? That if you get a group of crowd people together, they might have diverse opinions, but they kind of all converge at something which is broadly correct. So that's what
And
the that's
even like prediction markets, we've seen that as well.
exactly
It's like
exactly
it's trying to get the fundamental source of truth.
exactly right, because you feel like if you have collective wisdom, you're likely to get something which is more kind of aligned with the broad truth for that particular direction. Now, the issue there initially and even today was that like you can have a bunch of these models kind of working together to put this out, but it just like serializes the compute cost and serializes latency, because now you suddenly have like 4x the compute cost and 4x the latency. So that's where a lot of our innovation really came in, where we were able to basically figure out how to parallelize a lot of this verification. So a verification in our context is basically I am a GPT 4.0 model. I generate the output. Like you ask me who's the president of the United States, I say
Hmm.
it's Joe Biden. Okay, for whatever reason. Now this output gets sent to like three independent models who are diverse, and all three have to arrive at consensus saying that this is the correct output. And if the consensus is not arrived at, it keeps recursively thinking within itself to come to a correct answer where all the models agree. And with this system, we've been able to prove through our research, which is published, that we've been able to take hallucination rates from like 70%, accuracy rates from like 70% to almost like 97%, which is like a 10x improvement, right? And this parallelization, what it does is like in this case, for example, it was just one fact, but if there's like a sentence which like 10 facts, you can run all those 10 facts in parallel. So it kind of cuts down your latency and your cost by like 10x. So suddenly you have a highly performant, synthetic foundation model, we like to call it, which is basically a group of models working together to give the output equivalent to a foundation model. And that's just like what, we've been seeing quite significant traction on that so far.
Awesome. I love that. And so where does can you kind of like explain it like high level like architecture wise, so people like this audience is going to be probably 90% crypto native, and then there's going to be a 10% swing that coming in from the AI crowd, and we're trying to push more AI content. So like to kind of give that, and like where the crossover is, and like how you guys are like structured architecturally.
Yeah. So it was very apparent for us from day one that there is going to be a trust element to this, because of the fact that if you're doing anything related to reliability slash verification, the corollary to that is you have to have some degree of like auditability or verifiability involved, right? Because how will I know that you're reliable if I can't audit your reliability? That's the first question that comes up. In the software world, this is usually covered by SLAs, but SLAs don't translate to the AI world because AI is inherently unpredictable,
Mhm.
right? Like I can't guarantee you 99% uptime. I can't guarantee you these five things because I don't know how my AI works itself. What crypto lets us do is it lets us do dynamic alignment, right? It lets us actually create systems that ensure that the lowest common denominator, and in our case, the lowest common denominator is a model, is aligned to the goal of the network as a whole. The goal of the network as a whole here is basically make your intelligence as reliable as possible by reducing as much hallucinations as possible, right? And the goal of every single node on the network, so how our architecture is basically designed is we're a purpose-built L1. Our end output is a single API which is OpenAI compatible. That means you can replace it with any, like you can just go to any app. You have an OpenAI SDK that's built into it. You can just replace the URL and replace your API key, and Mira starts working.
Nice.
And how we operate is basically we will give you a Mira GPT-4 API. What this means is GPT-4 will be your primary model, which generates the output, but then it's wrapped around our verification. So it's like a highly reliable GPT-4 API or a highly reliable Cloud API, or any other model that you kind of have involved, right? Now, on the back end, what happens is that any query that comes in is routed to the primary model, which is the generator model, which generates the output. And then that output is then parallelized or like broken into like smaller pieces and sent to like different sets of models to verify. And once that's verified, it's kind of aggregated together into an output and sent to the end user. Now, each of these models exists as an independent node in the network, just like how you would have a validator existing on Ethereum. And you have to actually buy in with the token whenever the token launches. You have to buy in with the token to be able to actually participate in that. And this is
Mhm.
really important because if I don't have some sort of economic security involved here, what ends up happening is I can just come to you and say, I'm running a model in a network. I claim to be running a DeepSeek R1, which is a pretty expensive model. But in the back end, I might just be running a DeepSeek V1, which is like 100x, and I'm pocketing the arbitrage gain,
Yeah.
right? And there's no way for me to verify that unless like there is some skin in the game, involved there. So what that allows me to do is it allows me at scale to ensure I have a highly performant network of reliable nodes who are contributing to the network and are aligned with it, which is I think the most important thing here. Because because if there's no alignment, then everyone's going to optimize for their own like independent users. And this actually happened with so a company I would say is similar to us, although very different context, is like Scale AI, because Scale AI also sits like as a third party whose job is to verify outputs at the training level. They just call it data labeling, right? What is data labeling? You get an output from a model, You label this as good, not good, good, not good through a human and send it back. But scale's incentives are misaligned because now scale, while the incentive of scale as an organization is to give the best service to its customers, who's like OpenAI and stuff, they then contract all this stuff to like a data center in Africa. And the incentive of the data center is to just make as much money as they can. So what they would do is instead of having the human actually do the work, they'd make ChatGPT do the work, and all the issues that exist in ChatGPT would flow back to like their customers' models, right? So this is the same issue that can come up here, and crypto already has like incredible battle tested primitives that solve for that at scale. So, long answer short, our architecture is very simple. It's a AI infrastructure network with like hundreds and thousands of models that are hosted on it running as nodes. The end output is just simple API that anyone can plug into their AI application. And these models are highly performant, highly reliable, and highly reputable in the long term, towards the goal of the network.
What would need to happen to increase that success rate by another like order of magnitude? So you've got that down, and then you like, if you kind of got any ideas of what that looks like to kind of maybe get to there, is it a long term problem? Is it a short term problem? Like,
That's a great question. There are three vectors to this. The first one is just secular trend, which is that the models are just going to keep getting better. So
yeah,
let's say the base model gets from like, let's say it goes from 70 to 80% accuracy. Automatically, Mira goes from like 97 to 98, 99%
yeah,
accuracy.
yeah,
That's one, right? Second is actually a lot of hallucinations still, even to this day, occur because of what we call a cutoff date, which is where the model doesn't have real time information, right? So that's a very solvable problem. In fact, we're already like integrating search directly into our network. So every model on a network can natively access search, which solves for like a percentage point or two more on the hallucination side. And the third, and I think this is the most important one, is the long tail of why hallucinations occur is context, right? How do you define context in which the model is operating, right? Because the context of a DeFi agent is very different from the context of like a content agent. Is very
yeah.
different from the context of something else. And the model, no matter how general purpose it is, will hallucinate in different ways. I think the core solution for that is what we call our policy framework. So today, like I said, when our verification occurs, which is like the three models agreeing in consensus, it's a single policy, which is three diverse models. All three of them have to agree on all three of them have to agree before the output is sent out. But what we believe will happen in the future is developers, either first party, third party, or whatever, can define that policy. They'll be like, these are like the 10 different model types in the network. For this particular use case, a 4 out of 4 consensus is much better than a 3 out of 3. Or in some
Mm.
cases, a 2 out of 2 consensus is better than a 3 of 3, right? And what this ends up looking like is, if I have to take a blockchain parallel, is it's the smart contracts and the virtual machine. The virtual machine is the framework, and then the smart contracts that really serve particular end use cases. The consensus policies are going to start looking like that. So you'll have like a Mira consensus policy, which is, let's say, DeFi agent centric, something which is content centric, something which is research centric, and those will drive that long tail of hallucination, because then you can constantly narrow down the scope to say that, okay, this works really really well for research, but don't use this for something else, right? So I think these are the three vectors that we are spending a lot of time on, and we're fairly confident that we can get this to what we believe is like software SLA level, which is like 99.5% accuracy.
Awesome. So who's the ideal application that sits on top of this? If you were to like hypothetically speaking.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, what is it today and what is it in the future. Today, the ideal application is something that drives a lot of volume for us. So consumer applications, any kind of chat interface that needs reliability, and we're already seeing that. For context, today we do, if I'm not wrong, yesterday's numbers was 300,000 inferences a day, right? Which is
Nice.
pretty meaningful in terms of scale. Uh, but I think where we're seeing traction coming now, and what I'm the most bullish on, is Mira should be the infrastructure powering all agents. Any agent of consequence which needs a degree of reliability has to use Mira because it can't go anywhere else, right? So all these agent frameworks we should ideally be integrating it, which we are. We'll start seeing a bunch of those announcements now over the next few few weeks. And any agent which has to do something of high consequence should be sitting on Mira.
Nice. So, what are the, I suppose, biggest challenges that you guys are gonna face getting this into the market? Is it highly competitive? Like, are there any internal hurdles that you'll typically see? Sorry, I'm just gonna pause. Is it possible to just mute the Discord? Just my editor will kill me.
It should be fine now. Let me
Awesome.
just. Yep. Sorry.
All right, good. No worries. Yeah, so I'm just saying, where do you see the biggest kind of like challenges getting this to market? Are there any internal battles that are taking up a lot of mind share? And yeah, because it's obviously really difficult to build these systems out.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think technical issues are the hardest part. I think the technical issues will be solved. I think education is the problem because
Yeah.
this is like everybody who uses our product for context. It's very interesting. They actually tried using like OpenAI or some like basic AI model, failed, churned out of using AI, basically said AI can't work for us, and then actually came back in when they saw Mira's product. So it's almost like we work very well with people who fail to use AI, but that's not a great business strategy because like that means I have to wait for everyone to fail, only then can they.
And
So
not convincing them they just need to like skip that step.
exactly, right? So I think education is going to be really important, like showing people demos, showing people what this technology is capable of. Because how I think about Mira is it's a technology that unlocks new markets. It's not something that is like a better version of what exists today, right? So it's going to be a steep curve. But I think the reward is sitting there like 1 2 years in the future when everyone's going to realize that these agents need like more high trust infrastructure, to be more reliable and autonomous. So that is the key risk I see, that if we aren't able to educate the market and be the first out there when this trend really occurs, it's going to be much harder for us to really succeed. But I'm fairly confident that early days we're seeing enough demand and enough like takers for this. So as long as we keep doing what we're doing, we should be okay.
Yeah, I mean, we pushed out the Blockmates 2025 thesis yesterday. You guys made an appearance in there, and I started writing that in December, and then the space was moving that quick. I had to rewrite it 3 times, so that wasn't fun over Christmas. But what I kind of came to the conclusion with is, I think wallets, crypto wallets in general, have such a leg up and a head start with distribution, particularly with everyone coming on chain sometimes as the first port of call. And you typically, like when I first joined, you'd go to a centralized exchange and then you'd kind of slowly venture on chain. But I think now with a lot of opportunity being on chain, that might be people's first kind of entry point. And I'm extremely surprised if your standard EOA wallets that are flirting with the idea of social signing and even smart contract wallets aren't looking at some kind of core pilot command line interface is the next evolution of wallets. And I think it might even be this year. But then the question is, are they in a situation where they can really rely upon whatever model they're built up on top of to deliver and not start losing their customers' funds?
Yeah, no, and I think we're seeing we actually we launched Magnum Opus a couple of days ago, which is like our grants program, and we have a couple of teams building wallets, and these are like teams that have built some of the largest wallets in the crypto space in the past. But they're just so creative, man. I mean, these people understand a wallet user's journey so intuitively that they're like, this is where AI works well, this is where AI doesn't work. But they keep, what I'm seeing even now is they keep pulling back because they're like, I would love to ship this feature, but like GPT 4.0 is not ready yet for me to
Yeah.
be able to do this for a user. So I think for me, I want to be able to kind of go to them and say, use our API and you can ship this feature because you actually have infrastructure that's ready to be able to do this. If I can do that even for like 10 teams, that's like success.
Yeah, there's a load out there even on the market at the minute. I mean, I know here non Sphere One, Griffin, Tony's got a great product there. I think there's a load more coming online, but I wouldn't also be surprised to see the big names in the EOA space just kind of like turn that feature on as well. So I mean, a lot of those people listen to this, so you know where to get in touch. So what can you expand on that grants program as well? Like, just as I said, there's quite a lot of builders who listen to this, or aspiring builders that listen to this, that might um, be
Yeah, I
like
mean,
that point's really piquing their interest.
100%. I think, see, this is not like a traditional grants program. It's much so the team that we've taken a lot of inspiration from here is the way Mega Eat built Mega Mafia. I think
Yeah.
having a small group of highly motivated and highly skilled teams working with you. What we're basically building is like this group of extremely motivated and extremely, I'd say, talented individuals and teams who are building in and around the crypto AI space. So we have teams from like engineers from Meta, ex executives from like Epic Games, ex creators of pretty large wallets, etc., etc. And a lot of them are basically saying, if I had to reimagine what I have built so far, or what I would love to build with like AI as like the heart and soul of that product, what would it look like? Right. So anybody who's building anything across DeFi, entertainment, even like pure software, and more one wants like access to capital, but two also wants access to, I'd say, some of the smartest AI builders across Web 2 and Web 3. Feel free to come reach out to us. We're pretty selective, but we're very excited to kind of work with some great teams. And this is a rolling application, so whenever you see it, you might see this like 6 months in the future, but even then, we'd be happy to kind of work with you guys.
What are you looking for from a? Is it how much weighting do you give to how much weighting do you give to team in that
I think
selection process?
team gets the most weighting.
Yeah.
I think for me, it just has to be someone who's very motivated. I think
Mhm.
the one thing I've seen with crypto in the past uh, has been that like people do a lot of grant farming,
Mm.
and I'm really that I don't want I like unless someone's really trying to build a real business, or at least like attempting to do so. Like that's something we want to weed out on day one.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole sector of governance that I hope you guys can help solve with grants farming. Like taking the human input out of that would be a great start.
Dude, I honestly think on the grants farming part, again, like a bit of an aside, but it's like teams are themselves incentivized to do grants farming, like the people giving the grants, because
Mhm.
that those are like the numbers that token holders slash community kind of wants, right? So you often have to go against intuition to do something which is like against grants farming.
Yeah. And are you happy to take on two teams building towards a similar vertical?
Yeah, I don't think our goal is to kind of back whoever's doing. It's not like, see, the thing is, this is not PvP in our mind, right? We're not an L1 where like liquidity is either yours or mine,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Mhm.
You're like, I think AI is just blue sky. There's enough teams doing like a bunch of cool things. So we're more than happy to kind of take on teams as long as they're not like directly competing with each other and taking customers from each other. It should be completely fine.
And I suppose, the main value prop for them is funding, access, basically everything that they'd kind of need, which would be infinitely harder just kind of going out alone.
Exactly. I think funding, access, and see, we've raised from some incredible investors. We know almost every big investor in the space. We can really support a lot on that front, as well as just, market access, like figuring out who your customers are, figuring out early distribution channels through our partners and the people we know. So there's a lot of things that we've done and really like struggled to do in the past that we can kind of roll out a red carpet for you and just make it super easy.
Yeah, that's the last thing you want to be worried about when you've trying to get something to market as well, isn't it? All the kind of necessary stuff, but you don't necessarily want to do.
Exactly.
um, so, is there anything I might have missed from any of the questions? Anything you want to make people aware of? I'll leave
Yes.
like as many links in the description below, but like the floor is completely yours.
Yes. I think Uh, the most important thing that we didn't touch upon, but I think is becoming increasingly important, and this is from a builder perspective as well, is I think this is the greatest time in the last 20, 30 years to build applications, specifically because you have effectively magic intelligence, which is free or like trending towards being free. You have software that can create itself, and you have like new distribution channels that are emerging that never emerged before. We ourselves at Mira actually experimenting with this, taking a leaf off of Perplexity's playbook. While we have this core infrastructure that we've built, we're also going to be launching Mira Chat, which is an interesting kind of iteration of a multi LLM chat with search and everything enabled. But the benefit here is that, along with you paying a subscription for it, you also get rewarded for using it. And we want to see if we can really scale this up to like a large user base and make this like a real open source Perplexity alternative where, people actually get rewarded for using the application. So you'll see that coming out pretty soon in the next week or two from our stable. And Grant will send you like a pro subscription, and I'd love
Oh,
to see you get
amazing.
and yeah, it's going to be fun. So broadly, I think where we stand at a crossroads in AI and crypto AI is this is unbounded markets. This is like what DeFi really looked like in like 2020. I was there, when Yearn kind of came out, and people like, oh, this is like the highest it can ever go, and then it went like 100x from there. So, and it's not just like DeFi existed in isolation, right? I think crypto AI exists in the context that I'd say the largest tailwind in the history of technology in the 21st century. So things can get like really, really crazy from here over the next 5 years. And I think that's just like the most exciting space to build in. As an investor, like when I was still at Excel, you have a lot of options. Optionality is like the bane of your existence because you can do 100 different things. But the day I saw that this trend was happening, I'm like, if I don't participate in this, I'm going to regret this for like the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And I think that's how I would like recommend other builders to think about it as well.
Yeah, so there you go. One final thing on that. What do you think about the like perplexity, I suppose, pushing the like the commerce angle and stuff like that as well? Do you think anything that you guys would ever entertain, or is there any other directions you'd like to take with chat?
Yeah, I think with chat, we just want to. What we've realized is that open models are just as good. You don't need to have like a chat GPT and pay $20 a month to get something on a basic chat.
Hmm.
But because now CAC is like operating costs are so low, you can actually have incentives for people to use your product, make it better, almost make it like community powered, right? No one's built a good community powered search app, and I think it's like the traditional vampire attack playbook. If someone can do it, so we're experimenting with it. I think our product team is really good in being able to put out good stuff, and with that, if we can really build a meaningfully large application powered by Mira, it's going to be like it's going to be pretty like awesome for us. And with that, that interestingly becomes like if we have like 1 million, 2 million wallets or users kind of using it on a regular basis, it becomes like this natural source of distribution for anybody who works with us,
100%.
right? Like we can kind
100%.
of showcase a lot of agents and applications just through that interface.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time. It's great. Really, really happy to finally chat about everything that you guys are building. And obviously, there's an open invite. And if you've got anything else in the meantime, just please send it over. I'm sure everyone really enjoyed that one. And yeah, let us know. And we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Karan. Thanks for
All
having
right.
me.
Over and out. See you next week. Bye.
Quick one, nothing here is financial advice. It's for entertainment and educational purposes only. Always do your own research or speak to a financial advisor before making any investment decisions.